Pitching velocity is the #1 metric that all schools and teams look for. Without it, no matter how good of a pitcher you are, you're just not gonna get a shot at playing at the highest levels. And I understand this, and so this is one of the biggest focuses that I have in my training to make a comeback in professional baseball. And so today I'm gonna walk you through my exact plan of how I intend to increase pitching velocity and throw in the upper 90s again. I'm Josh Gessler, and if you're new here, all we talk about on this channel is to throw 95 miles an hour and beyond, because if you wanna play at the higher levels, Division I, professional levels, then you're gonna be throwing 95 or pretty close to that these days. But again, no guarantees. I just share what I've learned throwing in the mid-90s and what we see has been working with our guys who we've coached to throw in the mid-90s and beyond. Let's get straight into it. So I know with pitching velocity can be really confusing on what exactly to work on. Everyone online is saying to do this drill, to do this lift, to do their special method to increase pitching velocity. But how we view it is very simple. So the first is to build the engine, your physical capabilities of being able to produce enough force to throw harder, right? This is everything to do with your physical body. Now, the second part is the throwing side and the mechanics part. How well can you get all that force that your physical body can produce into the back of the ball at release? So we see it as a two-part problem, okay? Physically, if you can produce enough force to throw 95 miles an hour, then, engine-wise, you're probably good. But if you have the mechanics and the throwing side is leaking to where you can't actually transfer all that force because you have a bunch of leaks in your mechanics or something's going wrong and you can't actually get that force to the back of the ball, then you have a transfer problem. I view it in these two things, and so I'm gonna walk you through exactly what I'm gonna be working on the engine side and also the throwing and mechanical side. And before I get into my plan of how I gain pitching velocity, I wanna caveat this in saying my plan will be extremely different to someone like yours. And so how I view myself is my engine and my transfer are probably pretty equal. Maybe my engine is a little bit higher and my transfer is a little bit lower because I know I have a bunch of mechanical things that I can work on. But for me to be able to throw 98, right now in bullpens, I've touched 95. So when I analyze my situation in this two-part problem framework, for me, my engine and mechanics are pretty similar, okay? There's no glaring weakness to where I have way bigger of an engine and I'm not able to transfer it, and that's what's capping my velocity. Or I have absolutely incredible mechanics and my engine is lagging, and that's why I'm capped at a certain velocity. We see that a lot with different athletes, like one of our athletes, Chris, who had a V12 engine, right? He was an absolute stud physically, but his mechanics were lagging. And so for him, he just needed to work on the mechanical part to increase pitching velocity. And when he did work on those mechanics, he gained 5 miles an hour within 1 month. You get these big jumps if you have a big mismatch in either your engine or your mechanics. But for myself, I've topped out at 94, 95 miles an hour in bullpens. And for me to be able to get to 97, 98 miles an hour, I need to be working on both, right? There's no glaring weakness in either side. Maybe my engine is a little bit higher than my mechanics, but overall, I need to be working on both. So that's what I'm gonna be taking you guys through. Before we keep going, if you're a guy watching this, you need help gaining pitching velocity, whether it be the Division I or the professional level, you can book a call down below and we'll be able to see if we can help you. Or if you don't wanna book a call, you can send me a message on Instagram and I'll get back to you. So on the engine side of things, this is basically, your strength, your power, your force production, even your mobility, right? Everything to do with your body being able to produce enough force to be able to throw hard. If you're weak and skinny, then, even with perfect mechanics, right, you might not be able to throw 95 miles an hour. Obviously, there are outliers. I have a friend who's in the Texas Rangers, and he is like 5'8", 130, 140, tiny, but he throws 100. Right? So there are always going to be outliers who have really great mechanics and genetic potential to be able to throw really hard. But for the normies like us, but for the people who aren't as genetically gifted as that, like us, we need to work towards that. And so for myself, when I think about my engine, I have a really good strength base, but I'm in a unique situation to where when I threw my hardest, I was extremely strong with my lower body. To give you something to think about, I had 350 on my back the back squat, and I would just be able to jump squat that. And on the VBT, I was able to get up to 0.8 to 1 with 350 on my back, which is extreme. Once I lost some of that power and strength because I had a lower back injury, I couldn't load up my back anymore, my velocity just plummeted, right? And so for myself, that peak power, that extreme power and strength was something that I feel like I needed to throw really hard because of my mechanics and how deep I get into my back leg and everything else. And so that is one thing that I'm working on, which is peak power, right? And pushing that strength. And the way I'm doing this isn't to do like a traditional progressive overload, right? I'm not trying to squat 500, 600 pounds, but I'm trying to teach my body to go from a relaxed position into a max intent position as quickly as possible. One of my favorite exercises to do this is when the weights have stopped, right? They're not moving. And then all of a sudden you lift it as hard as you can, right? This could be a trap bar deadlift where you're trying to lift it as hard as you can. But for me, because I have a couple lower back injuries, I do it with the belt squat. And one of my favorite exercises for this is the Bulgarian pin belt squat, right? And so the weights rested on the floor and I load it up really, really heavy, pretty much to where like I can only do 2 to 3 reps with it. And I'm at a dead stop, right? There's no tension in my body. And as soon as I say go, I'm going as hard as I can and I'm trying to lift that weight as quickly as I can. So this is just teaching my body to fire extremely quickly, right? I'm not trying to build strength in a traditional way, right? I don't care about, being able to rep that out for 5 reps or whatever. I just care about being able to turn on my muscles and central nervous system as quickly as possible, because that's what I feel in my pitching delivery is when I'm able to turn everything on very, very quickly, that's when I throw my hardest. Right? When I start to get a little bit slower, right, and everything starts to turn on a little bit slower, that's when my pitching velocity suffers, right? And it's quite interesting. Like when I go through a strength phase, right, a traditional strength phase where, I'm doing like, 3 sets of 5 and I'm trying to progressive overload, and I have done a lot of these in the past, my pitching velocity will always go down because I'm moving slow, right? And I'm teaching my body to just move slow. I know that is the focus of that phase, is to build strength and, get stronger. But there is something to that, to where, for myself, I don't really have the time to build like a bigger strength base. I already have a good strength base already. And so I'm just trying to teach my body to turn on as quickly as possible, which for myself, I have found transfers onto the mound the best. Now, another thing that I'm working on with my lower body is concentric impulse, right? And so one of the big things that you've probably heard is to be twitchy, right? Oh, there are guys who just are twitchy. And I always wonder, like, how can you become twitchy and how can you train twitchiness, right? And when I came across concentric impulse training, one of the coaches at the Petra Lab, Pat Robles, has extensive knowledge on concentric impulse and how it affects pitching velocity. And basically, he told me how to train twitchiness or concentric impulse. And so one of the realizations that I had with twitchiness is your ability to fire things as quickly as possible, right? And so if you're able to go from a relaxed position into a max intent position extremely quickly, then you're going to be considered twitchy, right? And so I do a bunch of exercises that promote this. And for concentric impulse training, I do like consecutive reps. So it might be like 5 to 10 reps, but I'm trying to do them as quickly as possible. These are exercises that they feel weird. They challenge like your coordination and your neural drive more than your physical body, right? And for example, a really good example of this is something like a trap bar split stance jump. Right? So this is one of my favorite exercises. And basically what you want to do is to do a jump and do as many as you can within 10 seconds, right? And it's training that concentric impulse of being able to go from land to jump as quickly as possible, right? This like rebounding position, which is what we need in the pitching delivery, right? In the pitching delivery, there's just a bunch of stretch shortening cycles and rebounds that are happening all up to when you have to throw. So that's what I'm training with the lower body and concentric impulse, is my ability to rebound. But it's light, right? And so it's not gonna feel like physically demanding, but it's gonna feel like you're limited by how quickly your body can actually activate, which is what we are trying to train, especially with the pitching delivery. So when I'm throwing my hardest, what I feel is just to be super relaxed until the very last second, and then I turn everything on at once, right? And the quicker I'm able to go from that relaxed to tense position, the harder I usually throw. I'm trying to train that feeling of being loose and relaxed and then go, right? Especially with something like with the trap bar jumps, it's loose and relaxed, go, relax, go, relax, go. That's just training your brain, because I know we're working on the lower body with like trap bar jumps, right? But we're also working the central nervous system and the brain's ability to turn on the muscles as quickly as possible. So it's a full body exercise, right? The CNS runs through our whole body. And so we're training that and our ability for our brain to send signals rather than a muscle. And so once you start throwing harder, like 90 plus miles an hour, or even if you have a really good strength base and you're already super strong, this is what I feel like really gets you to that next level in terms of the engine, right? It's like the CNS, your brain's ability to fire your muscles rather than your raw muscle power to be able to push a lot of weight. Because if you think about it, you're not going to do a 500-pound squat on the pitching mound, right? Yeah, it might help a little bit, but for you to go from 500 to 550 to 600 pounds, is that really going to help your pitching velocity if you have a hard time turning everything on explosively and quickly? Well, probably not, right? And that's why we see so many guys, especially college guys, who are jacked, right? They have unlimited food in the cafeteria and they just go pump weights, right? And they work out like a bodybuilder. They're big, strong, they gain a bunch of weight, but then they only gain like 1 or 2 miles an hour. And they're like, oh, I thought I was gonna, gain a bunch of miles an hour because mass equals gas, right? But there are other pieces that go into that. Yes, you now have a good foundation, but you have to be able to transfer that onto the mound. All right, so the third thing in terms of the engine side is spinal mobility for myself. So this is like engine, but also mechanics as well, because the biggest reason why I'm working on my spinal mobility is so that I can get into certain positions in my delivery, right? And so the biggest example of this is side bend, right? They're going this way. And so what I was feeling a couple months prior to this was that when I would go here, like my brain wouldn't like it. There was some guarding that was happening. And if I did too many of these, like my lower back would kind of get sore, right? And tighten up. And I was like, why is this happening? And what I realized was because the brain was just guarding, right? It doesn't like this position for some reason. I know I've had a bunch of lower back issues in the past, and so that's probably why. But I had to gain mobility and really just tell the brain that it's okay to be in this position, right? So that I can get into the pitching delivery. Because in the pitching delivery, I get into this position pretty aggressively, right? It's not like a controlled like side bend like this. It's more just like a drop and I'm getting into it explosively. And for my brain to feel comfortable with that, I need to be exposing my brain to these positions a lot. And so one of the things that I'm doing is to gain mobility and also end range strength in these areas. One of my favorite exercises is to just hold a barbell above me, right? And just do a side bend. And I might hold it here for a couple seconds, just so that I start to feel comfortable in this position, right? And starts to tell the brain, hey, it's okay. Even with weight, like we're not gonna injure ourselves if we get into this position. And then, obviously, I fire out of it, which develops end range strength in that position, right? And also just being able to hold this iso hold down here, it's tough, and it's really tough, and it's just developing a lot of the muscles that support this position to make sure that the brain is comfortable with you getting into this position, right? And so just like 1 week of actually hammering this, 1-2 weeks of this, I'm able to get into better positions on the mound in terms of my side bend. And I'm gonna go into why I was working on this in the mechanical section. But spinal mobility, that's one of the big reasons why. I'm not trying to get mobile just to get mobile, because we've actually made a video on how just getting mobile and flexible isn't really gonna help you if you're just doing it to do it, right? It's gotta be done with intention because you're trying to open up something. But if you just get loose and floppy and just like flexible, it can actually do a lot more harm than good sometimes. And this is what I learned the hard way when there was one training period where all I focused on was mobility and getting flexible, right? And when I got on the mound, I just didn't feel as explosive, right? And obviously my pitching velocity was down. And it was because I didn't do it with intention. I just wanted to be as mobile as possible. And I thought that, hey, I'm gonna be able to get into crazy deep positions to fire out from. But it really doesn't work like that, right? If you're getting into deep positions, then you're gonna have to be super explosive. You're gonna have to be explosive and strong enough to fire out of these positions, right? And developing that power within end ranges is quite difficult. And so I learned that the hard way. But for something like this, it's pairing what you need to do mechanically with your mobility so that you can get into these positions. And that's how I feel about with mobility, right? Another thing that I'm working on is flexion right here. So being able to round my spine, right? And again, this is paired with my mechanics because one of the big things that I'm working on is to stay in flexion in my pitching delivery, right? Throughout my whole pitching delivery. And obviously it's not going to require a lot of flexion from my spine. It's kind of just like a shrug, like right here, right? And then I'm trying to go down the mound as long as I can in this flexion position until I actually have to fire, right? But again, I want to feel comfortable in this position with weight, right? So I do something like a Jefferson curl, a weighted Jefferson curl, in order for my brain to feel comfortable, right, in these positions. Those are the two big things that I'm working on for my spine. Other mobility things I'm working on is my hip internal rotation, especially my right leg, because I have that's all I get right now. That's max internal rotation, so that's really not good. So I'm trying to work on that to make sure that I can get into my load a little bit better, right? And rotate a little bit better. But again, it all comes down to what do I need to accomplish mechanically, and can I get into those positions? Okay, if you can't, is it a mobility restriction? And if it is, then okay, let's attack that, right? But I'm not gonna just go out and do a bunch of mobility exercises just to get mobile, right? For example, if I did a bunch of mobility stuff on my upper body, I already have a hyper-flexible upper body. If I get even more mobile in my upper body, well, it's probably gonna do more harm than good. So that's how I think about mobility to increase pitching velocity. Now, the last thing on the engine side is shoulder and elbow strengthening. And so one of the big things that we've started to think about is with pitching velocity, if you have really good mechanics, mocaps have shown you lose a lot of energy when it gets to the upper body, right? Because the shoulder and the elbow isn't able to accept as much energy, except the energy that you're trying to bring up from the lower body. Basically, this is more experimental, and this is something that, in theory should help, but we haven't really seen if it actually helps. But just being able to strengthen your shoulders with a bunch of, wrist weights, tubing exercises, even, in the weight room, progressively overloading arm care exercises, doing some of these things in order for my shoulders to be able to take more force, to be able to transfer a lot more of the force up the chain. Okay, a really interesting thing is that a lot of guys are producing a lot of force with their lower body, right, in their pitching delivery. And that's not an issue. They do have the force to be able to throw really hard, but they lose it somewhere in here. Whether that's a mechanical thing or a strength thing, that's very individualized. But for myself, I just want to keep working on my shoulders, my elbows, arm care stuff to make sure that my shoulder is good and I can accept as much of the force that I try to send up into it as possible. All right, so the second part is the throwing and the mechanics portion. So firstly, with my throwing program, right, I'm going back into more of a high CNS throwing program. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, super simple. It's to throw hard consistently, right? And so what I'm starting to get back into is more of a traditional velo phase where I might go Tuesday and Friday, I'm throwing as hard as I can. Right? And basically, this is just getting my body back into that max intent state, right? Think of like sprinting. If you haven't sprinted max effort in a long while, and then suddenly you're asked to go sprint max effort, you're probably not gonna feel that great, and you're probably not gonna sprint as hard as you can, right? But if you're sprinting on a consistent basis, then you're gonna feel a lot more confident that you're gonna be at your top speed, right? That's how I think about my pitching velocity is you need to be throwing hard consistently in order for you to throw harder. And so basically what this does for myself is teach my body, my central nervous system, to move the quickest it possibly can and produce as much force as it can within the pitching delivery, right? Because obviously it's a skill to be able to produce, because ultimately pitching is a skill. And so the more you can actually do high effort, max effort throwing, right, the better you're potentially gonna become, right? Obviously there's caps to where you can't just do velo days twice a week and expect to, keep increasing pitching velocity for eternity. But as long as, you're working on your engine side, you're working on your mechanics, and you're consistently throwing hard, then you should see a steady gain over time. Right? And so that's what I'm getting back into. Tuesdays, I'm going to do something like a plyo velo day, where I have my plyo balls a little bit more of a different stimulus than the baseball, right? And I'm going to run through a couple drills and throw them at max effort, right? And so this is doing two things. Basically, improving my mechanics by doing a couple drills that I like. I'll probably do something like the roll-in drill, which is teaching me to stay back with my upper body, right? Side bend, and stay closed for as long as possible before I fire. It's one of my favorite exercises. Another one is the rocker drill. I'm rocking back and forth, and then everything comes back, and then I fire as hard as I can as soon as my front foot lands. Another thing might be something like the step back, right? So just working on my drift. Okay, so basically a bunch of exercises that are working on my mechanics, but also forcing me to throw at a max intensity at the exact same time. Okay, and so I will do that, and then on a Friday I'll do like a pull down / mound velo day. Right? Pull downs I really like just because this is the exercise that teaches you intent, right? It teaches your body to be able to basically throw hard, right? And so when you're doing a pull down, right, you're gonna throw at the max velocity that you can ever throw, right? I've thrown 102, 103 miles an hour on a pull down, but obviously I have never done that in a game. And so you're gonna throw the pull downs at the hardest velocity that you ever have, right? And so it's teaching your body to be able to put everything into the throw. And this is really like valuable. This is more of like a mental thing, I guess. But this is one of the big things that I had to learn when I was going from 78 to 96 miles an hour. And I was at Driveline Baseball, the OG Driveline, where, all the coaches back then are at, coordinators of MLB teams. But before going there, I thought I was throwing hard when I would just go through and throw on the pitching delivery, right? But when I saw these guys actually do pull downs and do max intent throwing, it like took me to a new level. It's like it taught me that I was like, damn, I'm actually putting in like 80% effort rather than 100% effort. And so throwing intent isn't like the most sexy thing, but it's actually a very important thing for you to be able to throw hard and consistently having your intent at your highest, right? And trying to really push that velocity on something like a pull down is really going to help you throw hard, right? Throw with intent, which is something that you can lose if you don't throw at maximal efforts for a long period of time. Sometimes I find myself, if I haven't thrown max effort in a couple weeks, I'll come in and then I'll do like a velo day, and then I'm up to like 85, 86, 87, and I think that I'm throwing as hard as I can, but it's just because that intent isn't there. And so that's one of the reasons why I incorporate pull downs, is to not only teach the intent, but also to train the central nervous system and the body to be able to accept all that force, to teach my central nervous system and my body to be able to move quicker. It's kind of like a depth. So max intent throwing is the first thing that I'm incorporating into my throwing program. So the second part of this is mechanical efficiency. And so if you're at a low pitching velocity, right, if you're throwing 78, under 80, even under 85, like just doing velo days is going to help you increase pitching velocity, right? But once you pass that threshold of you start to plateau and these velo days aren't like climbing, then now you need to start working on mechanical efficiency, right? And this is one of the biggest things that's going to help you increase pitching velocity. Right? I've talked to my co-founder, Albertus, about this, and mechanical efficiency is probably the number one most important to be able to throw hard. And not only to throw hard, but to throw safely. One of our most recent case studies, Dalton Jeffries, when he was done with his MLB career, he wasn't throwing very hard, right? Probably in the mid to upper 80s. And so when he came to us to try to make a comeback in professional baseball, my co-founder worked directly with him, and the biggest thing that they worked on was mechanical efficiency and how he moved, right? Because he had multiple injuries. He had multiple injuries to his elbow and his shoulder. And one of the biggest things that was leading to that was an inefficient arm action. And so this was one of the biggest things that Albertus cleaned up with him first, so that he is able to throw safely, right? And then for him to go from the mid-upper 80s to the mid-90s, which is what he is throwing right now, came all through his ability to move better on the mound. And more specifically, Albertus worked with him on his pelvis a lot, okay? And so for him, for someone like Daulton Jefferies, he had a great engine, right? He already had a really good engine, but his mechanics were lagging. And so just bringing that up was going to help him throw in the mid-90s, right? And so even with the guys that we see who are at the highest levels, right, it's not really going to come from at the very highest levels, so guys who are throwing mid-90s, upper 90s, right? Like, they don't really get to that level by continuing to push their physical capabilities, right? Because like I talked about, most guys at that level are already producing enough force, right? And so it becomes an efficiency game of like, how much of that energy can you actually get to the ball? Because let's just say, and this is, completely made up numbers, but let's just say you produce energy that's equivalent to, let's just say, given a number, 100, right? Your lower body's able to get like 100 units of energy up here, and then it's like coming up, right? So it's 100, 100, and then a lot of it gets lost here to where it might go like, okay, 80, 70, 60, 50, and then a lot of it gets lost here, and then you're only transferring like a portion of that, right? And so obviously that's not like the exact thing that happens, but a lot of the time you're producing enough force to where if you're able to bring more of that up into the chain, then you will be able to throw harder. A lot of the time is going to come from mechanical efficiency and being able to get into positions that allow you to transfer more of that energy, right? And so for myself with mechanical efficiency, one of the things is we identified that one of the big leaks that I have is when I'm a front foot, I'm like leaning forward too much, right? Back in the day when I used to throw a lot harder, I was like back and loaded right here, right? So I have all of this time to be able to produce force, rather than when I'm here, I'm losing out on all of this stretch and time to be able to apply force into the ball, right? And so that's one of the big things that I'm working on right now. And with mechanical efficiency, all of us, we have something that we want to work on, right? There's no such thing as maxed out mechanics or like good mechanics, right? Especially if you're throwing under 90 miles an hour. It's like, okay, you have good mechanics, but you don't have elite mechanics, right? And so we all have things to work on. None of us have perfect mechanics, but we need to work on the number one biggest thing that's going to yield the biggest result, right? And for myself, it was the spinal side bend that we think is going to help me the most, right? For some of our athletes, it's a lot of the back leg stuff, right? Or it might be pelvis. And so we laser focus on that one thing that's going to yield the biggest amount of results, and we attack that with full force, right? And so we only focus on that. Even if there's like 5 different issues, we focus on one specific problem, because you don't want to get into this place where you're trying to fix 5 things at once, and then you're in your delivery and you're like, okay, I need to focus on my back leg, my pelvis, and then my front foot, and also my spine. And like, you're spreading your focus too much, right? And when you spread your focus, you accomplish nothing, and you don't improve at any of those. And so you want to laser focus on this one thing. For myself, it's more of this, spinal side bend, and previously it was pelvic planar rotation, right? To be able to get this moving down, and once that cleaned up, we moved on to the next, and so on. It's like a step-by-step thing, rather than work on everything at once. Right? And so that's how we approach it. That's how we've made the most amount of results, because we don't put our athletes in a place where they need to work on 17 different things, right? This is something that we see a lot, is you get a mocap or you get an assessment by a pitching coach, and they're like, okay, there are 73 mechanical flaws in your pitching delivery, and for you to throw 90 miles an hour, you got to fix all of these. And then you're all confused, and then you don't even take action on those 73 different things. Right? And so all of that just goes to waste. And if you need help with identifying what your biggest thing would be, or even how to fix your biggest thing, then you can book a call down below and we'll be able to help. Now, in terms of how I'm gonna improve my mechanics, and for example, with my side bend, right? I'm gonna create a whole different video on this. It'll probably come out right after this video. And so there are a couple things that I think about with making mechanical changes. The first one is to get instant feedback. The other one is to overemphasize and also do drills that are gonna help you get into those positions, right? And so when you're talking about instant feedback, it's something like setting up a camera, right? And then going through your pitching motion and then looking back at it straight away so that you match what you feel with what is actual, right? There's like a feel versus real thing to where I might feel like I'm going like this in my pitching delivery, right? Like at front foot, it feels like I'm doing this. But when I look at video, a lot of the times, I'm like here, right? And so there's this feel versus real thing to where you need to match what you feel with what is actually happening. So you need to continually go. So it's like, if you feel like here and you're a front foot plant, but you're still here, right? Maybe you got to feel like this to actually get to here at front foot, right? And you're only going to get to know this if you have instant feedback, right? And people are going to call this a superdome, whatever. But this is one of the biggest things that has helped me make mechanical changes is to get instant feedback. It might be a mirror, right? To where I'm looking at it, I'm like, okay, I'm feeling this, but that's actually happening. So I need to feel this for what I need to actually accomplish, right? And I'll do that. Another thing is to overemphasize. So for something like side bend, yeah, I'm gonna overemphasize it by doing something like long toss, right? And so when I'm long tossing, I'm gonna get into this deep spinal side bend where I'm not gonna be doing that on the pitching mound, right? I'm not gonna go like this and then throw, but it's just overemphasizing it, really feeling it out so that I can get that feel and even overemphasize it so that it doesn't feel as crazy when I'm throwing off the mound. Okay, and the last one is to do drills that are going to help me get into those positions and feel those positions. And so one of my favorite exercises that I'm doing right now is the rocker drill. So I'm just rocking back and forth, right? And then once I rock back, everything is going back. I'm getting into this position where I want to be. I'm trying to hold this until the very last second. And then as soon as my front foot hits, I'm firing as hard as I can. Okay, and so those are the three things that I'm starting to incorporate into my throwing program in order for me to make these changes, right? And I'm doing this quite aggressively to where I don't have a crazy amount of time for myself to get ready, right? I have probably like 6 weeks within this velocity phase to be able to get to pretty close to where I want to be, right? Which is, you know, being able to throw 95, 96 consistently indoors in a bullpen, right? And so for something like this, you know, instant feedback reps, I might do 100 a day, right? Even more to be able to ingrain these positions so that it's subconscious so that, you know, when I'm on my pitching delivery, I don't even have to think about it and it's already ingrained. Some people hate dry reps and some people actually, you know, it does a lot more harm than good because it gets in their head and whatever. But for myself, this instant feedback and doing that has really helped me develop better mechanics, right? And the other two as well. But I'll make a completely separate video on all of that, on how I think about making mechanical change. And so for my last point, none of this can be done correctly and properly if I don't have someone guiding me through this journey. And so fortunately for myself, I have the coaches at the Pitch Lab who are one of the best in the industry to be able to help me through my velocity development journey, because you know, I can try to coach myself all I want, but, you know, I have all these emotions and egos involved to where I might miss a couple things, right? I might think, hey, you know, no, I'm explosive enough. I have good mechanics. But I have someone, you know, with a different set of eyes telling me, hey, you have all these mechanical things that you need to work on. You're not even explosive, right? Let's work on that. So having someone helps you, who guides you, and someone who has helped guys get to the upper 90s, even the 100-mile-an-hour mark, is invaluable, right? And so that's why I'm surrounding myself with guys who can help me with that journey. And so if you're someone who's watching this, who you think you need someone in your corner to help you through this journey, you want help from us in order to gain pitching velocity, to get to the next level, whether it be the Division I level or to get drafted, then book a call down below. We can talk about your situation and how we might be able to help you to progress your pitching career. I'll see you there.